Good evening, everyone. Today is February 25th. Sorry, we're a few minutes late in starting. Meeting's being recorded. This is a public engagement. We have some wonderful folks in the gallery to answer questions, and the purpose today is to look at a session specifically about the housing initiative that is being looked at for the what we lovingly call the DPW site. And this is about one of the environmental issues that we are looking at. And therefore, I am going to turn this over to Jaime Martinez, who is our planning guru in the village. And there are a number of other people, the village manager, assistant village manager, my fellow trustees. I see our Stuart Gahan is here for the legal department, Bill Balter from the development, Paul Frioli, welcome Paul, our chief engineer. So you've got a whole lot of people that when we get to the Q&A, I think you will find very helpful in any questions, large and small, that you might have. And I also am turning it to Jaime because Jaime has a lovely presentation, and by lovely, a word I don't always use. It's really taking a complex issue and breaking it down for all of us to look at. It's a short presentation, and really the purpose is engagement, and then we'll take a Q&A. You can direct it to whomever you want. And I believe today Jamie Hoffman will bring you on. If there's a question that you would like to ask, we'll call it out in order, and she will then bring people on in the order that they wish. You could also, raise your hand if you've got the little blue or green hand, for those of you that are big Zoom users. Mr. Martinez, I think you are on.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. First, I want to thank everybody from the public who's out here. This is, I believe this is our 5th meeting. So we've covered quite a few different topics, and today we're going to talk about the Brownfield component of this project. And so that's not just talking about sort of the fact that the project is a brownfield site, but the impacts that has on the challenges of developing here, and the kinds of brownfield issues. And so hopefully it'll pique your interest and get you a little more direction on the kind of questions that I think that it may pose to you. Right, there's a lot that people don't understand about the challenges of building a brownfield. So hopefully you'll get a little more sense about that today. So first, we're going to start with a recap of the project like we always do. The site is a 3.4 acre site bounded by Water Street, Main Street, Seeker Road, and Central Avenue. The site is traversed by the Sing Sing Kill Brook. As everybody knows here, and we're talking about today, it's a contaminated brownfield site and was used as a coal gas plant from the 1850s to the 1940s. And it has been now subject to a consent order by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation between Con Ed and the state DC. This is a little bit of what it looked like many, many years ago. I think this is from the 1930s, and this is the coal gas plant that was on the site. Again, this is the current proposed area. So there's a public parking garage over here, and a parking garage for the residents, proposed building in the Sing Sing Kill walkway. And you can see it's pretty close to the train station. The proposed use is to be a mixed-use building with 109 residential units with a range of affordability from 30% to 80% AMI. There is the extension of the Sing Kill Greenway through the site down to Water Street. And there, of course, would be a parking garage for residents with the potential for an additional level of municipal parking to be built by the developer. So this is the shot from Water Street. Right now, I think what I wanted to do is sort of take you through the timeline of the consent order, starting from kind of the beginning of the start of the contaminating use, to get a sense of how we got to where we are today. So the site began operation as a manufactured gas plant, an MGP, in 1855, starting out as the Sing Sing Gas Manufacturing Company, producing coal gas In 1901, it became the Ossining Light Heat and Power Company, sort of transferring ownership. Then in 1904, it transitioned from a coal gas site to a carbureted water gas, which is just a different type of municipal gas. And that was the kind of gas. Both of these plants were there to serve the houses, to bring heat and light to the properties in Austin. In 1905, the Northern Westchester Lighting Company assumed ownership of the manufactured gas plant, and this was later incorporated under the control of the Consolidated Gas Company of New York, which is the predecessor company to what is now known as Con Edison. From sort of the beginning to the end, it produced from 9 million to 140 million cubic feet of gas continuously per year, all the way up until 1929. In 1930, the plant was placed on standby status, and in 1943, the plant was fully retired from service. At that point, it sort of lied fallow. It was taken down in separate different pieces at different times, and eventually a consent order was signed between Con Edison and the DEC in 2002. By 2007, there was a remedial investigation done on the site, and in 2012, there was a supplemental remedial investigation done. Both of those reports were put together and put together as a detailed DEC-approved remedial investigation report, which was presented back in September of 2020. Those details are actually available to you online. So what we're going to do is after this meeting, we'll post a lot of the links to those different DEC reports if you want to get them. But there's a fact sheet, there's detailed reports. I think one of them is like a 2,000-page report. So there's tons of really technical details for somebody who's very interested in getting into those. But for the general public, I would certainly guide you to the fact sheet, which is here, which is I believe just a couple of pages, and the alternative analysis report, which we're going to talk a little bit more here in a second. This is what the cover of the alternative analysis report talks about, and sort of the basis of some of the discussion today. So the contaminants and the alternative options for cleanup. I'm not going to get into the full details, but there are some, pretty significant chemicals that are in the ground. Some of them go down as far as 20, 30 feet, and so the as part of the consent order, they were required to give different alternate options to how to clean up the site. They did provide 4 different review options in this analysis report that was just released. One alternative was to take no action. That's kind of like a standard, option always that they put out there. Second would be a targeted soil removal, which would be just some soil removal, and then the recovery of certain of the parts of chemicals. There would be a third alternative number 3, that would be targeted soil removal. There would be targeted in situ solidification treatment of the visually impacted area, and NaPl recovery, which is basically contaminated compounds on the site. That includes injecting essentially Portland cement into the site to solidify the movement of any of those different features there. And then the fourth alternative would be to remove all of the contaminants from the site and fully clean it out. So those are the 4 different options. In order for this proposed project to move forward, it would require a really higher level of cleanup. So a little background on this, as explained, it's a heavily contaminated site, and the highly contaminated nature of the site has really been at the heart of why it's so difficult to do anything on the site after the shutdown of that gas plant. The cost for cleaning up the site for a strictly public use, just to turn it into a park or anything else, is the kind of thing that would be economically unfeasible for the village to undertake, just off, essentially off the back of the taxpayers' dollars. So it's not something that is feasible. Currently, Con Edison is proposing really just a limited brownfield cleanup where only a minimal amount of the contaminated soil would be removed, and the bulk of the soil would be essentially encapsulated in that Portland cement on site, limiting what could happen in the future. Now, because different uses require different levels of brownfield cleanup, where commercial requires less and residential requires more, the current proposal for Con Edison would significantly limit future development of the site. The work that is proposed by Con Edison would not allow for the redevelopment of the site for either restricted residential or recreation use, and would encumber the property with an environmental easement and a site management plan. And finally, in order for restricted residential development use to be permitted on the site, which means completing additional cleanup work above what is proposed by Con Ed, the property should be placed into the Brownfield cleanup program, such that all cleanup is required to prepare the site for development, which is proposed to be done at this time by Waldorf Water Partners if this project moves forward. I know I hit everybody here with a lot of technical stuff. There's a lot of technical details, and even though I'm talking about it, I don't necessarily want to pretend to be the expert here. We do have an engineer here to talk about some of these things, as well as the village engineer to kind of get into some of these details. So wherever you have questions, and I would expect people would have some, please do feel free to bring up those questions. Just a real quick run through the timeline before we get to the question and answer phase. The approval will require multiple steps. So the first step has already been completed, and that was the selection of a preferred developer. That's Waldorf Water Partners. Then we need to go through the community engagement process, of which we're going through right now, and we have to finish the development of the land acquisition and disposition agreement. After that, you have to have the BOT approval of the LATA. Then you would have to go through the State Environmental Quality Review Act environmental review. Would have to go in front of the Environmental Advisory Council, the EAC for the village. It would need to get a site plan approval by the planning board. There would need to be a special permit from the Board of Trustees, and then, of course, there would need to be the implementation of the LATA. As I mentioned, this is our fourth in the engagement series, our fifth meeting, including the one that we had on site prior to the start of this series. We do have two more after this. The next one is on March 9th at 7 p.m. and it's about the impacts on the school district. And then the subsequent after that is March 18th, and that is about talking about how to apply to get into the building and different features of how to move into the space if you were interested in doing so. All of the previous meetings are on video. We have those videos on OssiningDPWsite.com, so you can check it out there. And we definitely want you to check out the upcoming meetings, so you can go and find out the schedule of those meetings at villageofossining.org/Ossining -DPW-site, or you can go to the Ossining villageofossining.org front page, go to agendas and meetings, and check our community calendar out, and you can find out about them there. And so with that, just one last thing, I plug the Ossining DPW site, and if you have any questions about this project, certainly we want to hear them today, but you can also email the Board of Trustees and the administration directly at plan@villageofossining.org, and we'll get back to you with answers to any of your questions as quickly as possible. So with that, I want to hand it over to Village Manager Vittori.
Thank you, Jaime. So if we can go back to the gallery group view, we have a few people here tonight, and if anybody has any questions, please feel free to use the little raise your hand icon, and we will be gladly bring you over so that you can ask those questions. So right now, I am not seeing anybody with questions. We have Joe.
We have Joe, yes. Okay, Joe, I'm going to bring you over if you want to just hang tight. And then when you come over, just unmute your Zoom. Thank you.
Okay, hi, thanks. So this is interesting. I didn't really expect to do this tonight, but I have like 5 quick questions. The first one is, my understanding is that 2007 was the first real study done of the site to understand contamination. And I'm wondering why nothing's been done since 2007 to alleviate that. That's number one. Number two, is there any concern for whatever's on the site to be continuing to leach into the Kilbrook and then into the Hudson River? And that sort of goes to question number one. The other one is, are there any other agencies that sort of contributed to the contamination, and why isn't Con Ed fully responsible for the cleanup, since they seem to be the ones being blamed for the contamination? And three, what I don't understand is who decides whether the Con Ed proposal to clean up is enough, or can the village say, hey, sorry, but that doesn't get us back to where we started?
Thank you, Mr. Clark. So that's a few different questions, and I know that we have various people here who can answer those questions. Paul, maybe you want to start with the history of the site and the how I determine the contamination, and then we can also speak specifically to what the obligations of a Con Ed are, what we need to do to deal with that, and I think we'll be able to get all of those questions answered, Joe.
Thank you, Karen. I think the details on how we categorized the contamination was covered in Jaime's proposal, and how that was determined after the studies by their consultant from Arcadis, and that's how they developed their remediation plan. And the extent of that remediation that Con Ed feels they're responsible for will be the second part of this answer, which I'll turn it over to Wilder Boulder at that point. But for now, the Public Works Department and the Parks Department have been using that site basically for material laydown area and miscellaneous material moving and equipment storage. The contamination referenced in Jaime's proposal and that which needs to be remediated is more or less subsurface. And I think was also alluded to by Jaime, that the actual remediation plan is to be determined, but it could possibly be even in situ or in place, where similar to Harbor Square, they'll solidify everything and just stop further migration. The leaching comment, Joe, that you made there, we do what we have to do on the site to protect surface leachate from the materials in the surface from making its way to the Kilbrook, between carefully maintaining the sidewalls and the parapet walls there, and keeping an eye on any liquid buildup or potential flow into the Kilbrook from the site. As far as any groundwater leachate leaching into the Kilbrook, it's hard to determine. I think the contamination might even be deeper than the bed of the Kilbrook is now, but I don't want to say that definitively that it's not happening. I could just tell you that the test wells that were used to determine the remediation plan did not indicate that, and did not indicate anything when they did the testing over on the Harbor Square site either, that it was present in the Kilbrook surface water. But that said, for now, as we're using the site and for the duration of construction, and when construction is completed, the Kilbrook will be protected to the extent possible with appropriate protections on the Kilbrook. But again, without a site plan being completed and without a final remediation plan in place, it's hard to say exactly what we're going to do to that extent. But to protect this this stream, all measures will be put in place similar to that, which were put in place when we did the upstream work on the sanitary sewer to protect the surface water component. I think now I'll turn it over to whoever wants to speak for Wilder Boulder, if there's any details they want to offer on the potential remediation plan, and at least what's in the concept right now, and what will be done to ensure that the Dean apple does not make its way outside of the remediation zone into the Kilbrook.
Okay, I'm going to start and then have Jim Wendling speak, who's our in-house specialist on this. So the reason nothing little has happened since 2007 is really because Con Ed doesn't own the property. The village owns the property, but Con Ed's responsible for the cleanup. And they have this consent order on this and another 24 other properties. And their goal in general is to do as little as they can, but they have the DEC, supposedly DEC requires the site to be cleaned up. So this doesn't happen quickly. The benefit, which Jim will explain, of putting the property into the Brownfield cleanup program, in addition to what Jaime explained, is that there's a lot more investigation that will happen as a result of us putting the property into the Brownfield cleanup program, and a lot more comprehensive approach with a lot more oversight. So Jim, do you want to explain the process and sort of what your expectation is here?
Sure, yeah. As Bill said, Con Ed has to study in their alternative analysis report multiple different levels of cleanup. And what they're proposing is what's called alternative 3, which is some targeted soil removal, some in-place treatment, and a level of cleanup that they deem satisfactory. That doesn't mean the DEC has accepted that. That's just what they think is sufficient. If that work is done, it restricts the site going forward on what can be done on that site. It also encumbers the site with an environmental, what's called an environmental easement and site management plan, which therefore would require more work to develop the site. So if we got involved and the site was entered into the Brownfield cleanup program, it would require additional investigation by our team at greater depths and in more areas of the site. And then we'd have to come up with what's called a remedial action work plan, which would include significant more excavation and soil removal than what's proposed. With doing that, it would allow for the site to be redeveloped. It would allow for instance, a basement or a larger building. But what they're proposing is what they deem necessary or they deem sufficient. But again, that's not enough for what the village may want to use for that site, whether it's recreation use or restricted residential use. It's just, and the DEC hasn't accepted that. This is just what Con Ed has submitted. The village, as owner of the site, obviously has the right to decide what is ultimately done on that site. So I think that's big picture where we are right now. What the benefit would be of a Brownfield cleanup program would be substantially more investigation, which is important to understand the true contaminants on the site, and significantly more excavation and ultimately remedial work.
The last thing I'll say about that is the DEC is also very concerned, because they're the DEC, about the Sing Sing kill. We're actually doing a Brownfield cleanup right now in the city of Peekskill on a similar stream that has a similar stream running through the property. And the DEC is very much involved, not just in what we're removing, but how we're doing it and how we're protecting that stream. And they'd similarly be involved with how we're protecting this stream.
Yeah, and to Bill's point, I'll just add the DEC in the Brownfield program has oversight over the entire scope of work, from the remedial investigative work they're involved and they approve, to what's ultimately decided as the remedial action work and the ultimate cleanup. They have both in-field oversight and also oversight of all of the reports and data that is submitted.
Which, to append the work that we did upstream prior to this project on the Kilbrook Trail, was not a component because the trail ended at Central Avenue and the Brownfield site started after the limits of construction on the trail.
Joe, did we answer all your questions?
Well, I think you did the best you could, but the only comment I have is that if the DEC were that concerned, they would have done something in 2007 and not be sitting around waiting for somebody to come with a shovel to help them out. So I find the whole thing sort of a lot more interesting than I thought it would be, but I don't want to belabor the meeting here, but it seems like this thing should be been dealt with like 14 years ago.
Thank you. Do we have any additional questions? Anybody raising your hands? I see a few. I think we've had a few more people join as well.
Karen, while we're waiting, can I add something?
You
Responding.
certainly can.
So, Joe, what you brought up is a absolutely true statement and a good point, and it's a problem that frankly New York State has had across the state. As Jaime had explained in his overview, this gas creation was done all over the place, not just here. This is one of 24 sites, and that's in just Con Ed's territory, and there are sites all over the state. And basically, these utilities are governed by Con Ed, and ultimately Con Ed can go after the utilities, which is why Con Ed enters into these consent orders on multiple sites. But Con Ed is just not in the business of trying to get this done quickly, and it's a struggle for the DEC. It's one of the reasons that the Brownfield cleanup program was created by New York State, was to encourage private investment so that sites like this, and there are a lot of them in New York State, get put back into, there's an economic incentive for a private developer to clean up a site so that sites get cleaned up more quickly than if they're just left to their own devices and they become economic and other generators. This is a really good example. This site is sort of in limbo and has been for a long time because it's just not that economical to clean it up, and the village can't clean it up. They're sort of at the behest of Con Ed and Con Ed being forced by the DEC. So everything you say is true. It's one of the reasons that the Brownfield cleanup program is a good solution, not just for us, but for a lot of properties like this across the state.
Thank you, Bill. Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any additional questions. Nobody has their hand up. There's nothing in the message center there. So I think that concludes this evening's program. Of course, you know, you can find more information online. You can visit our website. You can visit the DPW site website. All of these meetings are recorded if you would like to see them again. We will have one more meeting. Actually, I'm sorry, 2 more meetings coming up. Our next meeting on March 6th, we will be, did I have that date right? Is it March 6th?
It's March 9th.
March 9th. March 9th. I apologize. It's Tuesday, March 9th. We will be talking about the fiscal impacts on the school district. So we look forward to seeing you then. And in the meantime, have a lovely evening, and thank you for attending. And thank you to all of our panelists tonight. Oops, just see a question pop up. This is from Frank Budding. Is there an option to implement a phytoremediation plan? So I am not an expert on phytoremediation. I believe this has to do with plantings that can help decontaminate the soil over time. Bill, is that something that you've run into in your brownfield remediation efforts?
I'm sorry, I did not understand the question.
Yeah, nor did I.
Okay, so is there an option to implement a phytoremediation plan? Frank, perhaps you'd like us to bring you over to as a panelist, and you can explain more. I know that you had sent us some information on it, but we're happy to discuss it with a little bit more input from you, because this is not something I'm an expert on.
Just in case Frank may not know how to raise his hand for this, I'm just going to bring him over if that's okay with everyone. And then if he chooses to unmute, then he can speak. Otherwise, then I'll bring him back over to the gallery.
Yep, he's got his hand up. Great.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yes,
Hi, Frank. Good evening. So you want to tell us a little bit more about phytoremediation, and
thank
could
you.
perhaps answer your question a little bit better?
Well, in various parts of the world where you have seriously contaminated soils, they have implemented phytoremediation plans by planting poplars and willows that actually take up the heavy metals, and then the trees are being harvested, and that's how you get rid of it. And that's clearly a cheaper option to do than carrying so many thousands of cubic meters of soil away. And also, these are long-running projects. Clearly, it's taken about 20 years at least to come to the point where we are here, and that whole remediation process that has to still effectively start. And that sort of ties in with the gentleman before. He said, well, couldn't we have done something a little bit earlier? And a phytoremediation plan could be a solution, because from here forward, we're still talking for a number of years, and in the meantime, you could plant it up. I don't know whether anybody has any experience with this. I'm a bit surprised that the DEC doesn't have it as an option as an option of remediation.
So I guess I have a question for you, Frank. I think that I don't know much about phytoremediation, but I'm assuming that some of these are long-term mediation plans for sites that aren't looking at development in the near term. And so this is an active DPW site. So shifting away from the DPW site would take some time, then getting it to phytoremediation, then starting the construction of this project. So
But I did send you
a way to sort of combine the proposed remediation of this project under the Brownfield program, sort of with a phytoremediation plan, or as an alternative, or I mean,
it could be both or a combination. But I did send some documentation about it.
Yeah.
Just to.
Hey, Jaime, could I just append one thing you said?
Mhm.
Hi, Frank. So I've seen those on a much smaller scale. I really haven't seen it on a site this big, but I have seen phytoremediation in areas, like Jaime said, that could be converted over to green space and allow the vegetation to do what they're designed to do over an extended period of time. But I think, without having it in front of me, I think the areas that are deemed contaminated right now and where all the wells are eventually going to be either paved or mostly have a building upon it. So that wouldn't really be an option in that area. And the green space on this site is outside of the contaminated area that exists now.
Mm-hmm.
The green space that will be left and the green space that exists now, where there is vegetation and the potential for that type of remediation, is not a contaminated area of the site.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is that at this time, we don't have a phytoremediation plan that's being considered. You did mention that there's heavy metals, and some of the very, very few stuff that I've read about it talks about heavy metals, but I don't know how much heavy metals are an issue on this site as much as there are some of the other types of, compounds that we did see, that coal tar and stuff of that nature. I don't know how phytoremediation works on those types of things. So,
Is Arcadis still actively involved at the moment?
Well, they prepared the report for Con Edison. I'm not sure. They work for Con Edison and not for the village.
I see.
I think that's important to keep in mind.
Okay. But they I don't know how they are structured, but they either started out in Holland or they are part of an international conglomerate but Arcadis has done a lot of phytoremediation in Holland. I know that over the years.
Arcadis actually became situated in this area by buying Malcolm Perney, which was an existing environmental consulting firm.
I see.
And Malcolm Perney still exists as a separate entity in their water division, but their environmental division, I believe, is fully under the Arcadis
I see.
umbrella.
I see.
That happened about, I'm going to say, 7 or 8 years ago. Arcadis purchased Malcolm Perney
I see.
Inc., which are who are headquartered in White Plains.
I think initially they started out in Holland.
Arcadis, yeah.
Yeah.
We do have another question as well. So I don't want to rush, but Frank, did you have any other questions?
I just wanted to put it on the table and as an option, and I encourage you to sort of seriously look at it as one of the alternatives. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. I'm going
Frank.
to move you back over into the gallery. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Yep.
Appreciate learning more tonight. This next question is from Sheila Speller. What is the projected cost of the cleanup of the site? What cost does the Brownfield program cover, if any, and the cost that Wilder Bolter will cover after Con Ed covers their portion? So I think this is probably best for Bill to answer.
I think I'd rather answer this accurately in a written response because it's a lot of information and it's a complicated answer because there's the cleanup that the scope is not exactly known. We've made as an assumption, which we'll put in an answer. And then there are tax credits that generate dollars to pay for the cleanup. Then there's also Con Ed making a contribution that we're making an assumption about. So I think we can summarize in an answer what our assumptions are, if that would be okay.
We can do that. We can just to Speller, I can email you that answer once we have it. We'll also be posting it on our ongoing, so we're adding to our FAQs all the time on the website. So anything that's discussed here, we're adding also on the website, and as well as in, if we're not answering the questions in the actual presentations, or even if there are, we're documenting that in a FAQ that we're adding to every time we do one of these. So we will get that information. I do think that we talked about the total cost of the cleanup at the site at an earlier presentation. So if I remember correctly, the total cost of cleanup is over $4 million, if I remember
right.
correctly.
Yeah, that's so. I mean, we're estimating it's a $4.5 million cleanup, and I can give more information to which I think is probably useful. The way the program works is there are tax credits that pay for somewhere between 40 and 50% of the cleanup, and then there are additional tax credits that relate to what we put on top of the ground when we're done, because it's, after all, an economic development program, and the goal of it is the goal of the New York State Brownfield cleanup program is to make it economical to be able to clean up the site. So our assumption has been that Con Ed will contribute a fair share that they would have otherwise spent to do the cleanup that they were willing to do. And that's a negotiation that'll be between us and Con Ed, the DEC, and probably the village, frankly, because it's the village's property. And it's not dissimilar to what was done on Harbor Square, which was also put into the Brownfield cleanup program. And there Con Ed also paid the developer money that they would have otherwise paid to do the cleanup. So the reason it's hard to just answer the numbers exactly is because there are a lot of variables. But as Karen said, the estimate of the raw cleanup cost is $4.5 million.
Thank you very much. Any additional questions? I'll wait a moment. Again, you can type in a question or raise your hand.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
There were some folks were like, oh, gee, it would have been nice if that could have been like a community garden or something. Is that site suitable for such a thing, given the contamination?
Well, it would be hard to do. I think there's a couple of things with community gardens that can be challenging. I can't speak to the gardening component from a contamination point. I would imagine right now it's probably not ideally suited, but maybe Paul, you can answer that better than I could.
I guess it depends on what you're gardening, how deep rooted the material is that you're gardening, or whatever you're trying to grow, and its potential, the roots interaction with the contamination. I think in the best case scenario, maybe some raised bed gardens for low rooted type vegetation or vegetables or such. But yeah, I think there would have to be a lot of QA QC prior to implementing something like that. Really anywhere. And
Yeah,
not just there, anywhere, but here in particular.
What's QA QC? Sorry.
Quality assurance and quality control. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously there's a big concern about any vegetables you grow there being edible. If you were to do that, I think one thing to keep in mind also is community gardens tend to need to be near a significant number of people, and the bigger space you have, the more people could use that garden, the more you need to be near a lot of people. That's a very large site to dedicate to a use that would be only within the walking distance of a not very significant number of, not commensurate to the amount of space that would be available for.
No, I only asked because it had been a topic of conversation on social media, and I had kind of said what you said, but I just wanted to put it out there as to get the explanation out there.
It would probably be a challenging site for many reasons, but mostly because of the contamination reason.
Yeah. Okay.
Any additional questions from either our panelists or our attendees?
I think we're good.
All right, Mayor, I'm going to turn over to you if you have any other closing remarks to say.
I want to thank everybody for being here. I am so happy now to have Zoom, frankly, with the recording capability. I hope that this is shared. I see Kate Schlott is on here from EAC. Thank you, from one of our volunteer groups, hoping that this will be shared with the rest of the committee, because I know, Kate, you oftentimes come here as yourself, but oftentimes also as a member of the committee, of the Environmental Advisory Committee. So thank you everyone for this evening. Thanks to the trustees that are here, and village staff and developer and lawyer and everybody else that is here. And I hope it's shared on social media, etc., so that people can learn, because this is, I think it's important for our community to know what's going on with the property that is entrusted to the village. Have a great evening, everyone.